You should have seen Wade Campbell's face when I handed him that resignation letter. Pale as concrete, voice cracking like my teenage sons used to. He actually said, "Is this some kind of joke, Gary?" Like my silence for the past 3 weeks wasn't answer enough, but let me back up. I'm Gary Morrison, 53 years old, and I've been running warehouse operations at Summit Logistics Solutions for 25 years. Started on the loading dock when I was 28, worked my way up through every department, survived 4 ownership changes and more budget cuts than I care to count. My story hits different because it's not just about one guy getting screwed over. It's about what happens when loyalty meets indifference and experience gets tossed aside like yesterday's shipping reports. 3 years ago, my divorce wiped out half my savings and left me with a mortgage I couldn't refinance and college tuition bills that kept climbing. My son Tyler was finishing his junior year at State, and I'd promised his mother I'd handle the education costs no matter what happened between us. That promise meant I couldn't afford to job hop like younger guys could. I needed this place to work, needed them to see what I was worth before my back gave out completely, or they decided 53 was too old for operations management. The conference room still smelled like burnt coffee and cheap carpet when I clicked to my final slide. Project complete. Cost savings locked in at $1.8 million annually. Distribution efficiency up 40%. Every milestone hit ahead of schedule despite COVID supply chain chaos that had other companies folding left and right. For 12 straight months, I'd lived and breathed that recovery project. Missed Tyler's 21st birthday because of an emergency in Memphis. Skipped Christmas dinner with my folks because the automated systems crashed during peak season. Spent my 53rd birthday troubleshooting vendor contracts while everyone else was home watching football. My lower back hadn't been the same since that weekend. I personally unloaded 3 trucks when our temp workers didn't show, but we'd done it. Pulled the company back from the brink when half our competitors were laying off entire departments. I looked around the table like I always did. Half the directors nursing their coffee, 2 VPs scrolling phones, and Wade, our CEO, holding court like some kind of logistics emperor. He didn't even touch the printed presentation I'd prepared, just nodded once, mumbled something about good momentum, and moved straight to quarterly forecasts. No questions, no comments, no well done, Gary. Just a casual great team effort. Let's keep the energy high. Team effort, right? For anyone keeping score. This is what corporate gaslighting looks like when it wears a polo shirt and khakis. I'd owned that recovery project from day one. Supply chain rebuild, vendor consolidation, 2 failing distribution centers held together with overtime pay, and my weekends. I ran point on the retail contract renewals while training 3 new supervisors and documenting every broken process the previous guy left behind. When equipment broke down, I fixed it. When clients threatened to pull contracts during the worst supply shortage in decades, I calmed them down with solutions I'd crafted at 2 a.m. When the numbers didn't add up because everyone was panic buying everything, I made them work myself using spreadsheets I'd built from scratch. And now my name wasn't even in the executive summary. I checked the handout afterward in the men's room. They listed the project team as a bullet point under operational improvements. Department heads got individual recognition. The IT guy who helped me install new servers got a mention. Even the intern who organized my filing got credit for administrative support. I wasn't even that. After the meeting, I passed Wade in the hallway. He didn't make eye contact, just said, "Let's circle up next quarter." Yeah, sure. I kept walking like he was a calendar reminder I'd already snoozed twice. I didn't answer because the file was already saved on my desktop. Final notice reviewed by legal, dated, signed, reviewed 3 times. I'd prepared it the week after he skipped our monthly one-on-one, then posted a company-wide email thanking everyone for the project's success, mentioning every department head except mine. The same week I had to miss Tyler's college orientation because of another emergency Wade created by ignoring my warnings about the Memphis facility. My ex-wife had to drive down there alone, fielding questions about career day presentations and parent weekend events I'd never attend, because this place demanded everything and gave back nothing. That night, Tyler called me from his dorm. "Dad, you missed a good day. They had this whole thing about supply chain management. Made me think of you." His voice had that careful tone kids use when they're trying not to make you feel bad about something that already hurts. Maybe next time. There wouldn't be a next time. Not here. Not while I was invisible. I didn't need revenge. I needed closure. Clean, professional, HR-compliant closure, and a workplace that actually noticed when someone saved them millions while their personal life fell apart in the background. A place that understood the difference between being grateful and taking everything for granted. The cracks started forming right there in that hallway moment. You could feel the shift when someone knows a storm's coming, but thinks they still control the weather. They didn't know I was already talking to headhunters, already reviewing offer letters from 2 competing firms, already consulting with my attorney about non-compete clauses. They thought I'd do what I always did, smile politely, absorb the slight double down on work until I burned out again. But this time, I wasn't sticking around long enough to become a cautionary tale for the next guy who thought loyalty meant something in corporate America. And the best part, they never saw it coming. I gave them 3 full weeks, 21 business days, counting the Friday when Wade left early for his executive retreat that somehow involved bourbon and a golf cart accident. Every day I waited for the calendar ping, the email, the coffee invitation, anything to signal that leadership saw the work I'd done, understood the weight I'd carried, and had plans to acknowledge it. Instead, I got nods. Professional nods like you give the guy who delivers your mail. On day 15, I checked my pay stub. No adjustment, no bonus, not even a spot award. Just the same number next to my name. Like nothing happened. Like I hadn't just pulled off a zero-defect recovery project during the worst supply chain crisis in decades. Like I hadn't personally negotiated with suppliers in 3 different time zones to keep our biggest retail accounts from walking. Like I hadn't saved 2 major contracts with weekend calls that lasted longer than Wade's attention span during quarterly reviews. The warehouse floor started feeling different. Conversations shifted when I walked past, not because I was being talked about, but because I wasn't. That's the part they don't tell you about workplace invisibility. It doesn't always feel like exile. Sometimes it feels like being absorbed into the machinery, becoming part of the background hum nobody notices until it stops. My doctor had been after me for months to do something about the stress. Blood pressure readings that made him frown, sleep patterns that had me waking up at 3 a.m. with my mind racing through vendor contracts and delivery schedules. "Gary, you're 53, not 33. He'd said during my last visit, "Your body's keeping score even if your paycheck isn't." He was right. I'd been popping ibuprofen like candy for the back pain, drinking more coffee than water, and my last decent night's sleep happened sometime before the Memphis crisis in February. The project had taken everything I had to give, and I'd given it gladly because I thought it mattered, because I thought they'd notice. By the 3rd Monday, I walked over to Helen Stevens, Wade's assistant, and asked the question that had been eating at me for weeks. "Any word on the post-project promotion timeline?" She barely looked up from her computer, typing with the kind of aggressive precision that meant she was probably updating Wade's calendar with more golf meetings. "He said he'll circle back next quarter." Next quarter, as in 3 months from now? As in after the next crisis I wouldn't be leading? As in, we're hoping you quietly give up and stop asking uncomfortable questions about recognition. I nodded, said thanks like a good soldier, walked back to my office. Then I opened the folder titled "When They Don't." Inside was the PDF I'd been refining for 2 weeks. I'd written it the night I pulled the final cost reports off the shared drive after spending an hour on the phone with Tyler about his upcoming senior year expenses. "Dad, I can get a part-time job," he'd said, and I could hear the worry in his voice. "I know things have been tight since the divorce. You focus on your studies," I'd told him. "I've got this handled." But sitting in my home office at 11 p.m., looking at tuition bills and mortgage statements, I realized I'd been counting on something that was never coming. A promotion, a raise, some sign that 25 years of showing up and solving problems meant something more than just showing up tomorrow to solve different problems. The resignation letter was clean, professional, everything HR would expect. "Dear Wade, I want to thank you for the opportunities I've had over the past 25 years at Summit Logistics Solutions. All very proper, all very by the book." But then, just above my signature, I added a line that would make his day spiral into chaos. "Good luck with the next logistics crisis." I read it 3 times, smiled once, then hit print. There's a stillness people talk about after major decisions. That's what it felt like. Not a storm, not drama, just silence finally making sense. I wasn't quitting out of anger, though anger was definitely part of it. I was done because they'd made my contribution optional, because I realized I could be essential and invisible at the same time. And essential work without recognition is just unpaid consulting for people who don't respect your time. Wade always took his coffee at 8:45 like clockwork. 1 cream, 2 sugars in the company mug he inherited from the previous CEO before they shipped him off to strategic advisory. He liked routine, liked control, liked the illusion of being a leader people respected without needing to earn it. Every morning, same ritual. Same self-important stirring motion while he checked his phone for messages from people more important than whoever happened to be in his office. So that Tuesday morning, while he was performing his little ceremony, I walked into his office and set the envelope on his desk. No speech, no drama, just one sentence that I'd practiced in my truck that morning. You'll want to read that before the operations meeting. His eyes flicked from the envelope to me, then back. He squinted like I just handed him a court summons or a tax audit notification. Something that didn't fit his carefully managed version of reality, where problems solved themselves and credit flowed upward like heat. I didn't wait for questions. Turned around, walked out of his office, and let the silence follow me down the hallway like a shadow I no longer needed to carry. 25 years of early mornings, missed family dinners, weekend emergencies, and stress-induced insomnia, all leading to this moment when I finally chose myself over their indifference. The door clicked behind me, one beat, then, wait, is this some kind of joke? There it was, the crack in the performance. His voice was loud enough to bounce off the glass partition walls, desperate enough that even Helen looked up from her typing. But I didn't stop, didn't flinch, just kept walking past the intern pretending not to eavesdrop, past the HR manager whose eyes briefly met mine with what might have been respect. My badge beeped at the exit scanner just as Wade's footsteps hit the carpet behind me. He was probably going to offer me coffee, or ask me to reconsider, or promise we'd talk about recognition next quarter. But I didn't look back because the decision wasn't up for discussion anymore. It wasn't a negotiation or a cry for help. It was closure he hadn't earned the right to delay. In my truck, I checked my phone to make sure the copy I'd emailed HR had gone through. It had. Subject: formal notice, Gary Morrison, attachment final notice reviewed by legal. And inside that file, in the final paragraph, right after thanking the team for learning opportunities, sat a line that would make Wade's day spiral into chaos. Per company policy, I will not be transitioning institutional knowledge beyond standard 2-week notice. All work is documented. I didn't owe them more than that. Company policy was crystal clear about knowledge transfer responsibilities, and I'd followed every protocol to the letter. I'd already stayed late when no one asked, already trained supervisors while my own title stayed frozen, already fixed what others broke without credit or compensation. Now they'd get exactly what they gave, the minimum required by law and policy. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I heard my phone buzzing with missed calls. Too late. They thought I'd be grateful for crumbs, loyal despite neglect, patient until the next budget cycle when they'd find another excuse to delay recognition. They forgot who built the systems they were standing on, and they were about to find out what happens when the foundation walks away. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months, I'd been documenting everything obsessively, partly because it was good practice, but mostly because I'd learned not to trust anyone else's memory about who did what. Every vendor contact, every process improvement, every workaround for the legacy systems that held this place together. All of it lived in encrypted directories on my personal laptop and secure drives that required my credentials to access. I tried explaining this to Wade multiple times during our monthly meetings, back when he still pretended to have them. We need redundancy in our system access, I told him. If something happens to me, you'll have problems. He'd wave it off like I was being paranoid, say something about cross-training being on the roadmap for next fiscal year. Next year, always next year, like institutional knowledge could be downloaded from Google when convenient. By Thursday, they were already scrambling. I got the first text at 9:15 a.m. from someone on the warehouse team. Hey Gary, do you happen to have the latest vendor contact spreadsheet? Something's missing in the shared folder. 5 minutes later. Also, what's the correct sequence for the Memphis changeover? The documentation seems incomplete. I didn't respond. My phone was still getting notifications, but only because I hadn't bothered disabling them yet. I watched them pile up like digital panic signals. 35 unread messages in less than 2 hours, each one more desperate than the last. The irony? Most of these people hadn't contacted me directly in months. But now, with Wade spinning in his executive chair like a suburban dad trying to fix a printer during the playoffs, I'd suddenly become essential again. 25 years of being taken for granted, and it took exactly 36 hours for them to realize what they'd lost. They tried replicating my efficiency protocols using a year-old training manual someone found in the archives. It was obsolete before it was printed, created back when we still used the old inventory system and had different vendor relationships. The vendor matrix they were using still referenced suppliers I'd replaced 8 months ago during the supply chain crisis. 3 of those companies had gone out of business during COVID, but apparently nobody else had been paying attention to those details. The cost tracking system, which I'd custom built with 3 approval tiers and automated reporting, didn't function properly because, my surprise, someone had removed my system access on Monday morning. Standard protocol, when someone gives notice, they said. So now they had beautiful spreadsheets with no actual data underneath, like trying to run a restaurant with a menu but no kitchen. By afternoon, I got the real kicker. A screenshot from Shane Foster, the junior supervisor I'd been mentoring for 2 years. It was from the warehouse team chat. One of the new guys had posted, "Does anyone know where the maintenance schedule actually lives? Manual says folder L7, but I can't find access. L7. Poor kid." L7 was my private shorthand, logistics 7th circle, a joke I'd made after spending a weekend untangling a mess Wade's previous efficiency consultant left behind before jumping to that doomed startup. The folder wasn't labeled L7 anywhere in the official system. It was nested under Legacy Protocol's backup V2 in an encrypted directory I maintained locally, updated every Sunday night like clockwork. Of course, they couldn't find it. Of course, no one remembered the actual file structure, because when you're the one who always catches the falling parts, people forget gravity exists. They just assume the important stuff will always be where they need it, maintained by someone whose name they can't be bothered to put in a project summary. And still, I stayed quiet. No response, no rescue, no helpful hints about where to look. Not because I wanted them to fail. Well, maybe a little, but because silence is its own kind of answer. The kind you choose when your work gets praised in private and forgotten in public. The kind that says if you only value the engine when it stops running, you never deserve the mechanic. Friday's leadership call was a disaster I heard about secondhand. Shane texted me updates like he was live tweeting a train wreck. Wade showed up 25 minutes late, tie crooked, video cutting out like even Zoom didn't want to deal with him. The operations report he screen-shadowed looked like it was assembled by someone who'd never seen our actual systems before. The metrics were outdated by 6 months. The efficiency ratings made no sense because they were pulling from the old database. And 2 major initiatives, the Q4 audit prep and the supplier transition that would save another $400,000 annually, were just gone from the presentation. Like no one had ever told him they existed, except I had, repeatedly. In meetings, in emails, in the presentation I'd given 3 weeks ago, that he'd glanced at once before saying great team effort and moving to his next agenda item. The presentation that was supposed to launch the next phase of improvements. The one where I'd outlined exactly how to maintain our competitive advantage through the next fiscal year. Now here he was pretending to captain a ship while waving an old map and hoping no one noticed we were already taking on water. Then came the moment that made it all worth it. The COO leaned forward on the call, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Wade, I'm looking at the dashboard and don't see updated efficiency metrics for the logistics overhaul. Where are they logged?" Wade blinked, clicked around his screen, shifted in his chair like a kid who forgot his homework. Should be in the project folder," he said, trying to sound casual, while sweat probably started forming on his forehead. It wasn't there, because there was no single project folder. Because that folder had lived on my encrypted local drive, updated weekly, compiled monthly, and synced to the secure server only I had maintained. A drive I'd wiped clean the moment my badge deactivated per company protocol. I wasn't being vindictive, I was being compliant. Company policy was crystal clear. Personally maintained systems, databases, tools, and local archives must be deleted or formally transferred prior to separation. I'd done both thoroughly and by the book, but Wade didn't read the book. He skimmed summaries, delegated details, and assumed the folder would magically reappear like it always had. That I would. Monday morning started with a system-wide alert they thought was just a glitch, until every attempt to run the monthly efficiency report failed. Complete failure. The automated system stalled at 12%. Distribution logs froze. And by 8:30 a.m., the facility manager was fielding angry calls from 3 major clients asking where their delivery confirmations were. Turns out when you gut an efficiency system built by one person over 25 years and never learn how it actually works, it tends to bite back hard. Access credentials had expired over the weekend. They assumed auto-renewal because everything just worked before. But the auto-renewal wasn't automatic. It was manually triggered every Sunday night by a secure script I'd built during the supplier crisis last year. A crisis I'd worked through 3 consecutive weekends to solve, while Wade was at his lake house posting fishing photos on LinkedIn. So without the renewal trigger, the whole authentication chain collapsed like dominoes. Then came the real chaos. The vendor contracts gone. Not missing, just not where they thought they'd be. Because someone, probably panicking earlier that week, had reorganized the shared files without understanding what half of them did. I'd labeled everything clearly, but when you think the organization fairy will handle your thinking, even a folder called Do Not Move, Vendor Masters feels optional. Wade naturally tried to override everything manually. That's when he met the security wall I'd built with my own hands after the last consultant nearly deleted live production data with a careless command. The override failed. The system returned one beautiful, brutal message: User G. Morrison terminated. Administrative reset required. It sat there on his screen like a ghost of every time they'd taken my work for granted. Administrative reset had been my idea, something I'd fought to implement when Wade called it overkill. Now he was locked out of his own system by a security protocol he'd never understood, built by a man he'd forgotten to acknowledge. Tuesday morning brought the call I'd been expecting. HR first, voice careful like she'd drawn the short straw. "Hi, Gary. Wade would like to speak with you. He's hoping you'd consider returning temporarily, just to help smooth the transition." I smiled into my coffee. I appreciate the call, but I already transitioned everything that was mine to transition. It's all documented. He's hoping for some hands-on guidance. Maybe just a week or two, of course he was, because now the warehouse was bleeding money and the Band-Aids weren't holding, because they'd realized team effort doesn't mean much when no one on the team knows where the wires connect. "I'm not available for that," I said. I left cleanly, on time, and by the book. A few hours later, Wade himself called. His voice was too upbeat, like a salesman who knows he's already lost but has to make the pitch anyway. "Hey Gary, glad we could connect. Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot after the project. I'd love to bring you back for a few weeks just to help the team get situated. I can offer you a 25% bump." I didn't say anything. Let him fill the silence with desperation. "Okay, 40% and a director title. Fully remote, you'd be back in the system this afternoon." I let the offer hang there, then answered flatly. "Wade, this was never about money." Silence. "You missed the moment," I continued. "Not the payout. The moment." He tried pivoting, talked about rebuilding trust, valuable contributions, long-term vision, all the corporate speak he should have used 3 weeks ago. That's when I cut in. "You remember the efficiency documentation I created? Of course, it was in the shared system. You removed my access the same day I submitted notice. So the vendor protocols, the maintenance schedules, the cost-tracking algorithms, they're all in that system you can't access anymore." What I heard in his silence wasn't anger. It was the hollow realization that the collapse wasn't accidental. It was structural, built on his choices, his indifference, his assumption that competence was replaceable and loyalty was infinite. But I could have left them to completely self-destruct. Instead, I did one thing right. Shane Foster deserved better than to inherit a disaster. When they offered him interim operations manager, I coached him through the negotiation. Fixed-term contract, signature authority on vendor decisions, performance metrics tied to his recommendations, not inherited problems, and full attribution in any published results. Shane rewrote their offer from scratch and slid it back across their conference table like a man who knew his worth. They signed it the next day. Just like that, he walked in, not as a desperate replacement, but as the only person who could untangle Wade's mess. 6 months later, I got a LinkedIn message from Carol Stevens in quality control. "Wade's been moved to strategic advisory. They're calling it a lateral opportunity." Strategic advisory. Corporate purgatory. He'd keep his salary, maybe his office, but nobody would listen to him again. Meanwhile, the efficiency project I'd bled for now sits on the company website. Innovative operational transformation. Scalable efficiency model. Only one name listed under project leadership: Shane Foster. I didn't flinch. He'd earned it. These days, I work from home. Freelance logistics consulting, efficiency audits, system designs for companies that remember how to say thank you. My rate is triple what they used to pay me, and nobody questions whether I deserve it. For the first time in 25 years, I'm not waiting for someone else to decide what I'm worth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop doing what you've always done. When people take your work for granted long enough, they forget it was never guaranteed. Your worth isn't determined by how much they need you when you're gone, but by how much you respect yourself when you're still there.